Hello, a pleasant afternoon to all of us. I am Hanijem DUMARAOS, a BEd 3 student, and I am tasked to report about the ways of sharing stories to young readers. Before I formally start my report, let me share this message to you from Laura Holloway, founder of and chief of the Storyteller Agency. She said that storytelling is our obligation to the next generation. If all we are doing is marketing, we are doing a disservice, not only to our profession, but to our children and dear children. Give something of meaning to your audience by inspiring, engaging, and educating them with the story. Stop marketing, start storytelling. So, from what I have reflected from her message is that we need in, in sharing stories, we need to do the right thing, which is to inspire or to engage to our audience so that our audience will learn something. If we do marketing well as a storyteller, we are doing a disservice because if we are just marketing this certain book or there's certain stories without giving the right learning to our audience, well, it does not make sense and it does not apply to their um to their lives. Unlike telling a compelling story is the most powerful and effective way to influence the actions of others. Like evoking emotions to your audience through storytelling is infinitely more effective than plain messages, and listeners will act or behave based on those feelings. So, as a future teacher, we must learn the ways of how to share stories to our young readers because through storytelling or through sharing stories, we can evoke or we can make our children love reading. So how can we share stories to the young readers? So the best way to tell effective stories is to start by nailing the basic structure and the narrative. So of course, we need to have an opening, the climax, and the solution to our story. So it is a basic components of a story. But as a teacher, we must learn or we must know how to share it. How what are the ways on sharing these stories? There are many ways of telling a story and sharing a story to our young readers. But I have here four ways of telling stories. The first one and the most common one is the storytelling. The next one is story reading. The third one is story living. And the last one is read aloud. So now we will know what are the differences and what are these ways of telling a story. So we have the first one on ways of sharing stories to young readers. So the first one is storytelling. So storytelling is the social and cultural activity of sharing stories, often with improvisation, theatrics, or embellishment. Stories or narratives have been shared in every culture as means of entertainment, education, cultural preservation, and instilling moral values. This means that storytelling describes the social activity of sharing stories. So, storytelling has these crucial story elements are plots, characters, and surprising angles. The term storytelling may refer to a verbal telling of stories and in a broader sense to the techniques used in media to tell the story of a company or a product. So, storytelling also used as a technique to gain insights into users. It builds empathy with the users and gain emotional access. With stories, designers use themes, staging, plots, and other techniques to increase the attractiveness of their offer. So, in storytelling, it is orally shared by the storyteller or by the teacher. So it is a way of telling one way of sharing a story, the storytelling. Another fact about storytelling is that it is the oldest way to share a story and also the oldest form of literature. Um, Way back, we all know that our ancestors or doesn't know how to write and read, right? So the way on sharing their literature is through pasalindila in Filipino. So they share stories through telling them. So this is storytelling is the oldest form of sharing a story because it is used by our ancestors because they are not able to write their stories. And stories that are ideal for storytelling. Number one example is stories with verbal humor. So example for this is Tiki Tiki Tembo by Arlene Mosel. So this Tiki Tiki Tembo, it is all about a story of a Chinese boy with a long name who falls into a wheel. It is a sort of origin myth about Chinese names are so short today. And Tiki Tiki Tembo no Sarimbo, meaning the most wonderful thing in the whole wide world. So that means Tiki Tiki Tembo. So it is about the story of how Chinese names are very short today because this story tells that um, every first son of a Chinese family should have a very very long name and it should be meaningful, unlike if having a second son or a younger brother, they can give him a short name without any important meaning. So this story can be told to the young readers. It can be shared through storytelling. Also, story as stories with repetitive lines can be also a way of can be shared through storytelling also, because having these repetitive lines or have these rhyming lines, the children will very adaptive or willing to learn, because they can they can familiarize the word you are saying, because they are rhyming. Because 'di ba, if we know, if we hear rhyming words, we used to nag-rhyme lagi, we used to kanang react, we used to react. So stories with repetitive lines is also shared through storytelling. Also, personal tales or supernatural. So these are examples of stories that can be told through storytelling. So, of course, in storytelling presentation, you as a teacher should make sure audience or the listeners are comfortable to their seats or to any position they have. Next is make sure audience or listeners can hear, of course. All of your listeners should hear. Next is maintain eye contact with the listeners. Fourth, consciously use pitch, stress, junction, and pace to create and sustain mood. Fifth is use confidential tone unless the story dictates otherwise. Number 6 is articulate clearly. And 7 is keep the story moving. So that is how you present storytelling. Because if you are storytelling like you are just sitting there, you are you appeal to the children that you are such a boring person, right? So as a teacher, you must stand up and take to take on the center and let your children be on focus on your story so that they can hear it clearly. The next one is story reading. So story reading is the oral presentation of a story by an individual to a person or a group from the text of a picture book. So this is a way of sharing story through reading books. So the teacher here can read books in front of the children. So story reading use of big books, and it is ideal for kindergarten. So here you can use the big books to your pupils so that they can having the big book, the children will be amazed. Wow, teacher, that was a very big book. So that you can attract the your children. You can attract their attention and you will start reading a story. So there are tips on sharing story reading. First, go through the story and talk the illustration page by page. So read each page aloud, point to each word, and encourage the children to read aloud with you. So this is a type of story sharing, that you will share the story and let them read it with you. Next is pause every now and then and allow them to read by themselves if they can. continue reading aloud if they hesitate or falter. So, at the same time, you are sharing stories, but also you are sharing, teaching them to repeat your words, or teaching them to read the story on their own. Next is do this over and over again and experience their joy in learning to read. So as you read as a teacher, they also read. So they will enjoy, and they will enjoy reading while listening to the story. And also make certain that the illustrations are visible to all. So of course you should, all the illustrations using the big book should be seen by all your children, because it might be some of your learners will not be, we will not be interested on reading it with you or listening it with you, because they did not see the illustrations. And also in in story reading, of course you need to share the story in one setting. If we start this day, you should end it within this day also. The next one is story living. So story living can be a way to enhance a brand's authenticity. Essentially, it is when a brand does more than just tell a story and takes action of some kind, whether that's to encourage positive behavior in others, support a cause, or create meaningful experiences. So, unlike the other two ways of sharing a story, this story living needs oral 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 sharing of the story with action. Unlike the other two, that storytelling also just just telling the story without action, while the story reading just sitting there and reading a big book. This story living needs to speak orally or read orally and with action. So, story living an option when the story has to be acted out with props like puppets, funnel boards, or chalk. It is what most of us call dramatization. So here it needs the teachers more effort on telling a story, because if the story um needs action, the teacher will do some action to entertain his or her listeners. So there are tips of sharing this story living. Number one, identify and practice the voice changes and the appropriate gestures that make the story live. So, of course, as a teacher, not just in story living, you need to act, or you need to be the actors and actresses of the story that you are using. If the if if the character of your story is a boy, you need to sound like a boy. And if your story is a girl, you need to voice out like a girl. The next tip is identify and practice the use of props and the best catch the plot, characters, or mood. So of course, as a story living sharer, you need to practice all this so that you will be guided on what should be next to use. The third one is practice the sequencing of cumulative tales so that the sharing is smooth and invites the participation of children. So you need to, because it needs a lot of effort, you need to sequence all the cumulative tales, so that your presentation will be smoother, and you can also ask participation for your learners to attend, so that they can also learn, but also they can also learn from your stories, and also they can participate with you. Read aloud. So this is the last way of sharing a story. So read aloud instruct it is an instructions where the teacher will use a different pitch, tone, pace, and volume, and pauses, and needs eye contact, and question and ask questions to the audience or the listeners, so that they can have an enjoyable sharing of stories and a fluent delivery. So read aloud start at home. These are special sessions when a parent or a caregiver takes the time to read the children with ages ranging from 0 to preschool age. So this is commonly seen in the home. So the way the mother, because usually the mother will teach the children to read, so what the mother was doing is an example of read aloud. So because the mother will need to teach his or her children how to read, so that the mother will read it aloud with and the pitch and the tone of reading should be very kanang used carefully, because how the mother will read, it is how the children will read in the school, and how they will articulate the words in the future. So there are tips on sharing read aloud stories. First, begin reading to children as soon as possible. The younger you start them, the better. Yes, it is true. The younger the children taught how to read, it's much better, because kapag kasi malaki na yung bata, kung tuturaan mong bumasa, palagi lang merong mga excuses. But as they practice at the very young age, they will make use of reading, and they will add it to their daily routine. So they are encouraged on reading. Always read. So use Mother Goose rhymes and songs to stimulate the infant's language and listening skills. Simple but boldly colored pictures books arouse the child's curiosity and visual sense. So in sharing read aloud, they can use rhyming words, or they can have a pictures, presenting pictures for the children to see, and while they're reading, because exposing them for the different visualizations and rhyme words, they can see, and they can articulate the different sounds of a words or a letter. Next is read as often as you and the child have time for. So, of course, reading needs to be learned in home. So, as a mother, you need to make time to your children, at least read stories with them so that they will learn. Next is remember that the art of listening is an acquired one. It must be taught and cultivated gradually. So you should not pressure your children. So at first you should invite them to read stories. You will read them a story, and later on you will practice them how to read a story. Next, start with picture books and go on to the story books. So these picture books, you will, as a mother, you will be challenged to have a very creative mind. So for example, you are showing a picture of a cat. So this is a cat. A cat always meow meow in the evening because the cat is hungry. So you can share to them a very short story about that picture so that they can learn. And also, and after that, you can move on to a storybook. So next is occasionally read above the children's intellectual level and challenge their minds. So you should take into account the grade level or the level of difficulty or the simpleness of what you read so that it can be in line with their level of um, understanding. Next is remember that reading aloud comes naturally to very few people. To do it successfully, you must practice. So, just like what I have observed from my sister, she is not a read aloud learner. Learner. She can read, but in a very hinay nga way, because kanang mura siyang mahadlok manggod nga mubasa og kusog kay hadlok siyang bunalan ni mama. So as a teacher or as a mother to teach your children, you should practice them to read aloud so that they can hear clearly what they are reading. Next, read slowly enough for the child to build mental pictures of what has been read. So as in sharing story, you should read very slowly, not very slow nga slow na jud, pero yung sakto-sakto lang para as you read, they can imagine things. They will use their creative thinking or creativity in thinking to build images in their mind through listening to your story. Next, lead by example. Make sure the children see you read for pleasure other than a read aloud time. So of course, if you want to inspire your children to read, you should see you should make an appearance that you love reading, and you put emotions when you read, put some facial expressions so that the child will also learn from you. To end my report, let me read this saying to you. A book is a good book for children only when they enjoy it, while a book is a poor book for children even when an adult rate it as a classic, if children are not able to read and enjoy it. Again, this is Miss Honeyjem saying thank you for listening to my report.